The Pope has approved another Latin Mass, and Vigano continues to claim that faithful Catholics are schismatics. Stick around to find out more. Well, I want to talk about a couple points that are coming up in the news. Number one, the Catholic Diocese of Arlington, Texas, has just received from the Vatican an extension to continue to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, as it's often called, the Missal of 1962, more properly. And this definitely goes against the grain of what we're hearing out there about Pope Francis hating the Latin Mass. It's also going to go against what Vigano himself says in a video that I am going to refute here momentarily. Now, we heard the great news that Pope Francis is going to allow the institutes like the FSSP and ICKSP to continue to go forward with their charism of celebrating the Latin Mass, the Missal of 62. So he has already said that. There have been rumors that he is going to give further restrictions on a diocesan level of the Latin Mass. There are rumors so far. It may or may not be true. Now, I have multiple videos going into whether or not that's a good idea and why this could potentially occur, why Pope Francis might do this. So you're welcome to go and watch those videos. I'll put a link to them in the show notes. Today, however, I want to explore, at least in this particular case, with the Catholic Diocese of Arlington, he has extended for another 2 years their celebration of the Missal of 62, especially because they properly implemented Traditionis Custodes, which was that document a few years ago where Pope Francis did restrict access to this liturgical celebration in particular cases. It wanted to review, before it gives permission, it wanted to review each liturgy or each community to make sure that they're not weaponizing the liturgy. How can you weaponize a good and holy liturgy? Same way you can weaponize good and holy things everywhere else. And we have seen weaponization of this liturgy. There's also weaponization of the Novus Ordo as well. So it goes both ways. Well, let's take a look at the article from the Diocese of Arlington, because they explicitly note Vatican renews permission for celebration of traditional Latin Mass in the Diocese of Arlington in accordance with Traditionis Custodes. I don't like the term traditional Latin Mass. I use it because it's a term most people are familiar with, but in reality, it is a misnomer for many, many reasons. But we'll go with it. So on July 29, 2022, Bishop Burbidge released guidelines for the Diocese of Arlington in response to Traditionis Custodes. Since the publication of Traditionis Custodes, the bishop has consistently emphasized 2 points. First, the Diocese of Arlington will be obedient to the Holy Father's directives, working towards unity in our use of liturgical rites. And that's a big deal there, because there's a lot of people who are saying, hey, no, if Pope Francis restricts this further, we're not going to listen to him. We're going to do this in, disobedience to the bishop and even the Pope if we have to. And that's already, again, a schismatic disposition. And that is what we call weaponizing this liturgy. That is where we miss the forest for the trees. That is where we're sacrificing communion with the church for a particular expression, liturgical expression. So that's certainly problematic. But the diocese is saying, hey, we're not going to do that. So Rome is going to see that, and they're going to say, okay, well, look, there's nothing wrong with this community because they're not weaponizing this liturgy. Second, the diocesan instruction related to Traditionis Custodes would be sensitive to those who attend the traditional Latin Mass. This has been evidenced by Bishop Burbage's original 2022 request for dispensation from Traditionis Custodes to the Dicastery for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. Consequently, 3 parishes were granted permission to continue celebration of the traditional Latin Mass in their parish churches for a term of 2 years. These parish church locations were named in addition to 5 non-parish church locations approved by the bishop. Several months ago, in anticipation of the expiration of the original permission, the bishop petitioned the dicastery for divine worship for a 2-year extension of the permission to celebrate the TLM. The diocese recently received word that the request has been granted. The parish churches to which this permission applied are St. Rita, St. John, and St. Anthony. The TLM will also continue to be celebrated at the previously approved 5 non-parish locations. So that's 8 different locations. In its response, the dicastery commended the diocese for how well it has implemented Traditionis Custodes and on the diocese's continued commitment to help those persons and groups attached to this form to worshiping according to the current Roman Missal. The dicastery suggested that once a month, in place of the masses usually celebrated in the traditional Latin Mass be celebrated in Latin using the Roman Missal of 2008. The bishop has accepted this proposal, which will solely pertain to the 3 parishes listed above. So this is a very balanced approach, and I suspect if all dioceses were doing this and taking this approach, I suspect there wouldn't be further restrictions. Unfortunately, a lot of places did not do this, and a lot of parishes did not do this. The bishop expresses gratitude to pastors and priests for faithfully supporting diocesan policy and offering pastoral accompaniment and union with the Holy Father to the faithful who have a great devotion for the traditional Latin Mass. So there it is. That's good news. Very good and balanced way to handle the situation. And there you go. There's a case where if things are being done properly, Rome is not going to restrict it. Rome's not going to come down hard on them. But if Rome is seeing that people are weaponizing the liturgy, yeah, there's probably going to be some additional restrictions and lack of approval and extensions. Okay, so now let's go to this one. LifeSiteNews posts exclusive. Archbishop Vigano gives message calling out enemies of the church. Now, who's the enemy of the church in the video? Pope Francis. Pope Francis is the enemy of the church. So if you're a faithful Catholic and you're in union with Pope Francis, you're part of the enemy. You're part of a sect. You're part of a schism. You're part of a group of apostasy, according to Vigano. Yes, this is what LifeSiteNews is promoting. Not only that, they're saying this is just a powerful message. In fact, go right here to my Twitter. You can see them say it right here. It's a powerful message calling out the enemies of the church. Who's the enemy? Again, Pope Francis. And LifeSiteNews is saying, oh, this is a powerful message. More on that in a moment. Let's evaluate this quote-unquote powerful message. And let's see if it is orthodox. Okay, let's start around the 1 minute 24 second mark, but just for those who may not be familiar, just to catch you up to speed, Vigano has been excommunicated. He excommunicated himself several years ago. And the Vatican recently came out, not excommunicating him, but simply saying he already excommunicated himself. So the Vatican didn't excommunicate him. The Vatican came out and clarified and made sure everybody's on the same page. Vigano has already excommunicated himself because he denies that Pope Francis is the Pope. He also denies the legitimacy of the Second Vatican Council. Those are the main reasons why. They could have also dinged him for illicit ordinations and setting up his own seminary, schismatic seminary, and establishing his own parallel church. They didn't address that yet because it wasn't even necessary. They just went ahead and noted he has already excommunicated himself. So he has been excommunicated. He has created his own parallel church. I call it the Veganist Church. His followers are the Veganites. How has he set up a parallel church? He has a schismatic seminary where he's ordaining schismatic priests, and he sends them into the territory of faithful Catholic bishops without the approval of the bishop, and obviously without the approval of the Pope. What do you think that's called? That's called the parallel church. There's no way around that. It's called the parallel church. Whether he admits it or not, that's called the parallel church. So he has established his own church. LifeSiteNews promotes it with great effort. So I say LifeSiteNews is the propaganda arm for the new Veganist Church. They're not Catholic. Again, more on that to come in a moment. And again, I have to stress the point that he has made in previous videos and also that he makes in this video. And that is that, again, Pope Francis and the church in communion with him, he sees that church in apostasy. He says that church is in schism. So if you're in communion with Pope Francis, he says, you're in communion with a schismatic, apostate, false church. So basically he's saying all faithful Catholics are not Catholics. All faithful Catholics are schismatics. All faithful Catholics are part of a false church. That's what he's saying. And this is why I find it odd that you'll find some Catholics out there who say they're in communion with Pope Francis, and then they defend Vigano. And I'm thinking, what? You're defending a guy who thinks that you're part of a false religion, a false church, a false sect, a schismatic church. You're defending that guy? Well, he said some really great things about McCarrick. Again, for those who are not familiar, I did a whole 3.5-hour video showing his involvement with McCarrick and his failure to rein in McCarrick, knowing about McCarrick, knowing about issues with him, and his failure to do anything about it, and his failure to sufficiently follow up with allegations made about McCarrick when it was his duty to do so as nuncio. And he was instructed to do so by the Vatican. Documented that in great detail. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But you can't pull that card and say, well, he did some great things there with the McCarrick thing. Actually, no, he didn't. He has a whole lot to answer for that he has not answered for. And most people aren't holding him accountable. And bishops out there who are still praising him for his handling of the situation with Vigano are, I suspect, maybe ignorantly praising a man who failed to address the issue with McCarrick. But then they want to say that they're serious about addressing sexual abuse in the church. But they're not serious about calling Vigano to accountability, nor do they call him to repentance for his schism. Interesting how that works. But they will call out Pope Francis in a heartbeat, even if it's something that isn't even true about the Pope. They'll call him out. They won't do that to Vigano. Interesting. Anyways, so that sets the stage for what we're about to see. It's a short video, maybe only 10 minutes long. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the entire video. I'm just going to kind of give you the highlights, although since it is pretty short, we're going to cover the gist of it. So let me share my screen and make sure that y'all can hear the audio. And let's start with 1 minute, 24 second mark. Right around here. Let's begin.
Of the church declare me to be in schism and excommunicated. This authoritarian decision has once again made evident the extraneousness of the Bergonian Church to the true Church of Christ. whose authority it usurps in order to intentionally destroy it. They are the false shepherds against whom the Lord warns us. But the laws of the church are paid for the good of souls.
All right, let me stop there. And for those who may not be able to understand him well, his transcript says this. A few days ago, the Roman Sanhedrin, interesting the way he describes the authority of the Catholic Church, that presents itself as the supreme tribunal of the church, declared me to be in schism and excommunicated. Actually, they didn't do that. And it's amazing that he doesn't know that they didn't do that. They didn't declare him to be in schism. They said that he has already put himself in schism, and they just simply made that known. This wasn't a declaration. It's rather just a confirmation. But maybe I'm quibbling with terms here. The authoritarian decision has once again made evident the extraneousness of the Bergoglian Church to the true Church of Christ, whose authority it usurps in order to intentionally destroy it. They are the false shepherds against whom the Lord warns us. There's a typo there. It says wants us. It should say warns us. So, what does that mean? Well, as I noted, what that means is Vigano is saying, if you are in communion with Pope Francis, you're part of a false church, not the true church. I mean, it's very clear right here. You're part of the Bergoglian Church, not the true Church of Christ. Where's the true Church of Christ? The one that he's part of, right? His church. Now, we know that the true Church of Christ is the one that is in communion with Pope Francis. So we know that he's a schismatic. We know that he is not part of the true church. And we know that he is doing exactly what he is accusing the Church of Rome of doing, and that is he is usurping authority. And he has a false church. But he says the true church is the false church, and my church is actually the real church. So again, if you're defending Vigano, at least just say, hey, you know what? I'm not in communion with Pope Francis anymore. At least just be honest with yourself. Don't play this little game where you say, I'm in communion with Pope Francis, but I defend Vigano. You can't have both. Vigano is saying, if you're in communion with Pope Francis, you're part of a false church. You're a schismatic. So if you're going to follow this guy, at least be honest with people and say, hey, I'm not in communion with Pope Francis anymore. I'm in communion with Vigano. And people then can kind of know a little bit more clearly that you're a schismatic. But be honest. Don't play this little weasel game that we see some Catholics doing. Catholics, by the way, quote unquote. More on that here in a moment. All right, let's go to the 2-minute mark, which is kind of where we left off. So let me just press play from there.
Not so that mercenaries can abuse them to scatter the flock. This is why all the norms that prevent doing good or encourage doing evil are completely forceless and worthless, starting with the word that Bergoglio and the official hierarchy are fighting against the Tridentine Mass.
Okay, so he's saying, hey, you know, the Church of Pope Francis is fighting against the traditional Latin Mass. And again, for those who may not have clearly heard that, here is the transcript. He says, this is why all the norms that prevent doing good or encourage doing evil are completely forceless and worthless, starting with the war that Bergoglio and the Holy Hierarchy are fighting against the Tridentine Mass. Wow. I guess he's just going to ignore the fact that Pope Francis, again, has told the institutes, continue your charism of celebrating the Latin Mass. I guess he's going to ignore instances like the one I just showed you earlier with the Diocese of Arlington, where 2 years, again, got another extension, 2 years, because they're doing things right. That shows you the issue with Pope Francis is not with the liturgy itself, and it shouldn't be. The liturgy is good and it's holy. So you shouldn't have a problem with the Missal of 62, substantially speaking. He shouldn't have an issue with it, and he doesn't. The issue ultimately is its weaponization. Now, can we talk about the need to reform the liturgy, the need for the reforms that came out of the Second Vatican Council, the need to tweak some aspects of the Missal of 62? Of course we can, but that doesn't mean you're opposed to that missal. So you're going to see Pope Francis and pretty much everyone since the Second Vatican Council, at least they should be saying, hey, there are some needs to reform some aspects of the Missal of 62. But in and of itself, there's nothing fundamentally wrong. It's a good and holy liturgy. It made numerous saints. Now, it's not this business of being the Mass of the Ages and a 2,000-year-old liturgy. We know better than that. I've done videos showing that that's just completely false and propaganda. That being said, it's a good and holy liturgy. So again, it shows you the issue with Pope Francis and the Missal of 62 is not the liturgy itself. So what you hear from him is propaganda. Now, this will work with people who are already disposed to believing this nonsense about Pope Francis. For people who already harbor hateful feelings towards Pope Francis, they're going to eat this stuff up from Vigano. Oh, they're going to love it. But it's false. It's propaganda. So let's go to the next part. Picking up where we left off around the 2-minute, 30-second mark, reviewing his actual video, something that my critics never actually do with my own content. They never actually show what I say, even though I will show them, I will show what they say, and that way you can fact check me in real time and see if I'm misrepresenting people. So let's see what he says. Let me make sure that you can hear the audio. I know it's a little hard to understand him, but I'll also show the transcript here in a moment.
I urge you not to be intimidated. The Mass is a rite sanctioned in perpetuity by the bulk who quo primum tempore of Pope St. Pius V. A rite no one on earth can legitimately prevent you from exercising, especially when the holy alternative is to attend a Protestantized and increasingly adulterated rite.
He just insulted all faithful Catholics who attend a Novus Ordo. He says your liturgy is Protestantized and adulterated. So if you attend a Novus Ordo, in his eyes, he says you're part of an adulterous rite. Wow. Wow. And then there's going to be Novus Ordo Catholics who defend this guy. That's what blows me away. Blows me away. But let's get to the fundamental problem, the initial one. Did you catch that part about quo primum? Look what he says. I urge you not to be intimidated. The Mass is a rite sanctioned in perpetuity by the bull quo primum of Pope Pius V, and that no one on earth can legitimately prevent you from exercising it. Really? Really? We're going to go there. Quo primum? Really? Really, Vigano? No wonder. No wonder he believes some of the nonsense that he believes. Like Lefebvre's excommunication was lifted. No, it wasn't. Basic misinformation. No wonder he's been duped into saying this nonsense. He's actually bringing out the quo primum argument. Dude, it's been refuted for 42 years. What are you talking about, Vigano? The Pope, the Council, and the Mass, James Locutus, put that thing to death. Are you seriously still bringing this up? I'll summarize the response, but you can go and watch. I've done a couple videos responding to the quo primum argument. I have one already linked in the show notes on the quo primum issue. Go and watch it for more details. But effectively, the argument is this. Pope Pius V in the 1500s, who promulgated the Tridentine liturgy, which, by the way, is not the same as the Missal of 62. Just have to throw that one out there. Promulgates this liturgy in the Roman Rite. And what he does is he says in quo primum, nobody can change this liturgy here. Nobody can touch it. Nobody. And it's in perpetuity. It's promulgated in perpetuity. Okay. So it sounds like the Pope is saying, hey, this can never be changed. This is it. This will always be the liturgy of the Roman Rite. Right? That's their argument. That's Vigano's argument. Except for a couple inconvenient facts. The same Pope who said that modified that very liturgy multiple times, several times. And many popes after him also modified that same liturgy. And none of them said that quo primum somehow stood in the way. None of them. It's a ridiculous argument. As far as in perpetuity, the same thing was said of the breviary. And yet, numerous popes modified the breviary. And nobody objected. By the way, the phrase in perpetuity substantially is the same language you can find in the Old Testament for the Levitical priesthood. The Levitical sacrifices and the Levitical priesthood is going to be perpetual, in perpetuity. Now, are any of us sacrificing bulls and goats right now? No, because we recognize Jesus fulfilled that, right? So when we speak of in perpetuity, it doesn't necessarily mean forever. It just means indefinitely until the lawgiver himself modifies it. So whenever the Pope Pius V in quo primum says, nobody can alter this, he's talking about nobody other than a Pope. But a Pope can alter it. He sure thought so. He altered it. The same Pope who said that altered it. And many popes after him altered that liturgy. So they understood this language of nobody can alter this, it's in perpetuity, to refer to everyone else other than the lawgiver, the Pope. One Pope cannot bind another Pope on matters of liturgical discipline. He can't. Cannot. Impossible. The only way one Pope can bind a future Pope is if he clarifies that a matter is dogmatic in nature. Now, is the Missal of 62 somehow dogmatic? That this has to be the expression of the Roman Rite, or let alone the missal that was promulgated by Pius V? Of course not. Of course not. That's a matter of liturgical discipline. Although, oddly enough, Bishop Athanasius Schneider is equating it to something that's dogmatic. So I did a whole video refuting it, showing how ridiculous that is. Because you would have to say, if that missal is dogmatic, you would have to argue Jesus or the apostles gave us that liturgy. That's what you would have to argue. And that's not the case. We know the Roman Rite came much later. So, it's a ridiculously bad argument. And to hear Vigano perpetuate this stereotypical sedevacantist argument is just mind-blowing. I can't believe it. I'm just thinking, are you serious? Well, no wonder he's been duped. No wonder he's been fooled into starting his own parallel church. The dude thinks that quo primum is somehow a good argument. The quo primum argument. This is laughable. And this is who the schismatics are gathered around? This is clown theology. This is ridiculous. This is something you would find from someone on Twitter, a random on Twitter. This is nothing that any theologian should take seriously. Nothing that a faithful Catholic should take seriously. This is a laughably bad argument. So I guess in one sense, I'm surprised to see him say it, because I'm surprised he would employ such a ridiculously bad argument. But at the same time, I'm not surprised, because he's also creating his own parallel church and reinventing the same mistakes that Martin Luther made 500 years ago. So I guess I should kind of already expect him to be like this, but I don't know. It's still a little bit of a surprise. We're going to take a quick break here and come back with more from Vigano and the Veganist Church. So stay tuned. Be back here in just a moment. For years, I've tirelessly defended the Catholic magisterium, despite pushback from numerous people slandering this ministry, misrepresenting it, and calling for its cancellation. Our situation today is very similar to the days of St. Maximus the Confessor, who was constantly pressured to deviate from the teachings of Rome and embrace the heresies that many other bishops were promoting. He was exiled, ridiculed, slandered, but he stood fast despite this persecution, which also included the imperial court of Constantinople cutting off his arm and ripping out his tongue so that he could no longer write the truth and speak the truth. It can be costly to speak the truth and defend the papacy in an age that is so hostile towards it, just like during the days of St. Maximus. But this is what we are called to do. This is the faith and tradition of our forefathers. I plead for all Catholics to stand up for our church and defend it. And consider supporting this channel that has been vindicated by Rome's decisions time after time again. You can do that by subscribing and supporting this ministry at patreon.com/Reason and Theology or reasonandtheology.locals.com. There's also a PayPal and a GoFundMe link in the description of this video. God bless. All right, let's continue. Share my screen. Bam. There it is. Dare we proceed? What other nonsense are we going to hear? Well, let's go to the 4-minute, 20-second mark. Hear from the new veganist Pope.
He's been trampled down. A few days ago, I received a message from Mel Gibson, whom you all know. He wrote to me, "I'm sure you expected nothing else from Archbishop Vigano. I know that you know he has no authority whatsoever. It is really a badge of honor to be shunned by the false post-conciliar church. You have my sympathies that you suffer publicly this grave injustice. To me and many others, you are a most courageous hero. Bergoglio and his cohorts have the cloth and the buildings, but you have the faith." Mel is right. They have the vestments and the churches, but we have the faith, as in the time of Saint Athanasius. But I am not an hero. Those bishops and priests who open their eyes after my excommunication and take a stand will be heroes.
Wow. Okay. A few days ago, I received a message from Mel Gibson, whom you all know. He wrote to me, "I'm sure you expected nothing else from Bergoglio. I know that you know he has no authority whatsoever. It's truly a badge of honor to be shunned by the false prophet of the Catholic Church, post-conciliar church. You have my sympathies that you suffer publicly this grave injustice. To me and many others, you are most courageous hero. Bergoglio and his cohorts have the clothes in the buildings, but you have the faith." Mel is right, Vigano says. They have the vestments and the churches, but we have the faith, as in the time of Athanasius. But I'm not a hero. Those bishops and priests who open their eyes after my excommunication and take the stand will be my heroes. All right. Look, I went over the whole letter. I have a link to it in the show notes. Went over the whole letter, refuted it top to bottom in much more detail. But let me just briefly respond to this for anybody who has not seen that video and doesn't have the time. So he pulls out, "Hey, I got this letter from Mel Gibson." And Gibson is saying, Francis isn't the Pope, he's Bergoglio. No shocker there. He's been a sedevacanist, I think, his whole life, by the way. "I know that you know he has no authority whatsoever. It's truly a badge of honor to be shunned by the post-conciliar church," which is, again, reminiscent of Martin Luther, because one of the reasons why Luther was excommunicated, because he said that it's a badge of honor to be, to cherish. It's a good thing to cherish your excommunications from the Catholic Church. So kind of the same thing here. Mel Gibson is doing, he's pulling Martin Luther. "You have my sympathies that you suffer publicly this grave injustice." Actually, no. It is Vigano causing a lot of suffering and grave injustices to Pope Francis. and the faithful Catholics. To me and many others, you are most courageous hero. Not at all. Bergoglio and his cohorts have the clothes and the buildings, but you have the faith. Said every schismatic ever. Every schismatic. You know, the Gnostics could say this back to St. Irenaeus. You know, St. Irenaeus says, hey, we have, our churches here, and they go back in apostolic succession to the apostles, and they don't preach Gnosticism. The Gnostics could say, well, y'all got the buildings, y'all got the clothes, y'all got this apostolic succession, but you don't have the faith like us. Every heretic, every schismatic in the world can say this. So it really doesn't mean anything. Mel is right, Vigano says. Well, no, he's wrong. They have the vestments in the churches, but we have the faith as in the time of Athanasius. Well, I debunked that one. Vigano is no Athanasius. Athanasius was always in communion with the Holy See, always defended the Holy See. Always. That is not what Vigano is doing. He's been excommunicated, and he's railing against the Holy See. He's not an Athanasius. He's the exact opposite of Athanasius. So it's gaslighting. But this is what the devil does. He deceives people. But I'm not a hero. Stop it, Vigano. Stop with the false piety. Stop it with the false humility. You have raised yourself up as an authority over and against the successor of St. Peter. Stop pretending to be humble. If you really had humility, you would listen to the Holy See. But you set yourself up in opposition to the Holy See. You're not humble. So I don't want to hear this. I'm not a hero. Those bishops and priests who opened their eyes after my excommunication, they're the heroes. False piety. Also disingenuous. Because Vigano doesn't believe they're bishops. I put a link into the show notes where Vigano has undergone a reconsecration ceremony. Not that you can be reconsecrated, but you understand what I mean. He's attempted to be conditionally consecrated. Why? Because he doubts the validity of his episcopal ordination because he rejects the Second Vatican Council. And that ordination right comes from the Second Vatican Council and its post-conciliar reforms. So he had to go and get reconsecrated or consecrated for the first time or conditionally consecrated, whatever terms you want to use. He went and did that, which is a sacrilegious matter. It is also something that automatically excommunicates you. And if you do that, you're saying that all these other bishops who went through these consecrations, according to Vatican II's rite, that they're also doubtful in nature. So in other words, the vast majority of the masses that you have ever gone to in your life, Vigano thinks are either invalid or doubtfully valid. The vast majority of times you've received the Eucharist. For Vigano, it's not the Eucharist, or at least doubtfully so. Same for confession. Same for many of the other sacraments, like confirmation. He's going to say it's either invalid or dubious in nature. So to pretend like he thinks that these bishops are bishops is disingenuous. He doesn't think that. What he wants to do is get other bishops on board, and then when he gets them on board, he'll put them through a consecration ceremony where they'll be conditionally consecrated. Once he gets them hooked, then he's going to have the conversation, well, you need to go and get consecrated because, that ordination that you went through, and yes, ordination and consecration are synonyms when it comes to the episcopate. I did a whole video proving that. Well, the consecration you went through, it's dubious in nature. So you need to be conditionally consecrated according to the old rite. This is nefarious. It's deceitful. So let's continue with the next part here. Let's go to, let's see. Oh, by the way, let me address the issue of the Novus Ordo as a Protestant. Well, no, we already addressed that. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I covered everything. Okay, yeah, let's go to the 5-minute, 51-second mark. We'll just start from where we were, 5 minutes, 38 seconds. Okay, here we go.
May your commitment as Catholics not fail also in the civil sphere. If your bishop do not have the courage to publicly condemn well-known self-styled Catholic politicians who brazenly violate God's commandment.
Let me stop there. Do you see how deceitful this is? He's appealing to Catholics and he's saying, hey, you Catholics out there, if your bishop's not doing the right thing, and then he's going to set himself in opposition to the lawful bishops and say, hey, come and join the Veganist church. Well, he doesn't believe they're Catholics. Again, they're in communion with Pope Francis. So they're part of a sect. They're schismatics. Why are you calling them Catholics then? It's disingenuous. You know why he's doing this? You know why he's calling faithful Catholics Catholics? Because he's a deceiver. He wants to bring them into his church. But again, just listen to what he says. You're in communion with Pope Francis. That is a sect. It's a false church, an apostate church. Okay. So why are you saying the followers of Pope Francis are somehow Catholics and appealing to them? Why are you doing that? Oh, because you're trying to deceive them. That's why. And then he says, if your bishops aren't doing this and that, you don't believe they're bishops. Why are you playing around like this? If you did believe they're bishops, why did you get consecrated again? Why did you get conditionally consecrated? Why did you do that, Vigano? Because you don't believe in your previous ordination. You think that that consecration is either invalid or dubious in nature. So why aren't you saying to these Catholics, hey, you schismatics out there who are part of the Bergoglian church, stop following your dubious bishops who are likely not bishops. Now, he's not going to say that because that's not a good sales pitch, right? But that's his position. But this is what weasels do. I call it ecclesiastical weaseling or ecclesial weaseling. This is what they do. They're trying to weasel their way in there, slither in there, and get faithful Catholics to listen to them. Once they get them hooked, then they'll come and condition them with the rest of their cult mentality. And then they'll condition them with more information and indoctrinate them further once they bring them in. It's disingenuous. Let's continue.
You know that neither can in any way be supported or obeyed. Denounce the betrayal of the rulers and the breaking of the social contract. Bring to light the coup that the deep state conducts in your beloved country with the same methods by which the deep church demolishes the Holy Catholic Church, so that when they do may be understood, what they do may be understood by all. If you want our Lord to reign in the public sphere, you must ensure that his kingdom is consolidated and made solid first of all in your own daily life, especially in your families. The global coup d'etat, the coup dragging the world and the ecclesial body towards the ruin of apostasy and rebellion against the majesty of God, this coup d'etat counts on your silence and your blind obedience to succeed in imposing it definitively.
So he's saying, hey, don't be deceived by this fake Bergoglian church. It's incumbent on you to see through it and be part of those faithful Catholic bishops and priests out there, who's basically going to be him and a few other Sedevacantist bishops and Sedevacantist priests. This is why, again, he is ordaining illicitly priests and sending them into the territory of diocesan bishops without their approval. So he's trying to get you to join the Veganist church. Now, he's not going to call it that because schismatics never recognize that they're schismatics, as we saw with the preconciliar popes. Time and time again, What the schismatics will do is they'll call themselves the Catholic Church every single time. They won't say, we're part of a fake church, we're part of a schismatic church. They never do that. They always say they're part of the Catholic Church. Luther thought he was Catholic until the day he died. They always will say that they're the Catholic Church, but in reality, they're a parallel schismatic separate community, a parallel church. It's not the Catholic Church. So he's saying, hey, leave the true church and actually come follow my fake parallel church. But he's not going to put in those terms. He's going to say, leave the fake church of Bergoglio, come and join my true church. Well, we need to talk more about ecclesial weaseling, because that's exactly what LifeSiteNews is. As I showed at the beginning of this video, LifeSiteNews promotes this and calls it a powerful message calling out the enemies of the church. Well, as you saw, the enemy in the video is Pope Francis. So let's get this straight. LifeSiteNews claims to be Catholic, but LifeSiteNews promotes videos that says Pope Francis is not the Pope, is an enemy of the church, and says, hey, yeah, this is a powerful message. Powerful message. Huh. Ecclesial weaseling. Trying to weasel their way in there with faithful Catholics to get them thinking that they're Catholic when in fact they're not. And they're just not being honest enough to say, we're no longer Catholic. We're part of the Veganist church. But of course, schismatics never say that because they think that they're part of the one true church. This is what they do. This is what Satan does. Let me give you an example. What if there were a group out there who says that they're Catholic and they promote a video that promotes gay marriage? What if this Catholic put that out there and said, oh man, this is a powerful message. It's a powerful message. You go and watch the video and it's promoting gay marriage and abortion. Would you come away saying, yeah, it's a powerful message? The guys who share this they're bona fide Catholics. I sure hope not. If you are, you're in the wrong channel. Or actually stick around because I'll fix that problem for you. No, that's not Catholic. And it's disingenuous to say that is Catholic. Now, we all recognize that whenever Father James Martin does stuff like that, whenever he promotes stuff that defends homosexuality, he won't come out and say homosexuality is not a sin, but he'll then promote arguments and articles that argue that. And we say, yeah, that's some weaseling there. And we rightly call that out, right? And we say, well, okay, he's not explicitly saying it. He's endorsing an article that says it. So it's effectively the same thing. Okay, now we call Vigano out. I'm sorry, we call Martin out for that, but we don't call Vigano out when he does it. We don't call LifeSiteNews out when they do it. Why is that? If LifeSiteNews came out with a video tomorrow and they promoted a video by some guy saying abortion's cool, gay marriage is cool, all that, and they said this is a powerful message, you would be right to ask, hey, how are you still Catholic? This is not Catholic. But what a weasel will do is they'll say, oh, but I'm still Catholic. Now, you wouldn't buy it in the case of if they were promoting a video on abortion and gay marriage, but for some reason, a lot of people still buy it that they're Catholics whenever they promote sedevacantism, outright promoting sedevacantism, saying it's a powerful message. How are we allowing people to deceive us like this? And they've deceived so many people in numerous other instances. You know who LifeSiteNews reminds me of? The legacy media who told us right when Trump was shot, they had headlines like, Trump rushed off stage by Secret Service because of loud popping noises. That's the level of content you get from LifeSiteNews. That's the level of spin that you get from LifeSiteNews. Whereas in the case of legacy media, What they'll do is they'll actually set the record straight and finally admit Trump was shot. LifeSiteNews, though, won't come back and admit that they were wrong. They'll just continue to perpetuate that false narrative. And people still see them as Catholic. This is not Catholic. They are a propaganda machine of the veganist church, not Catholic. You can't tell me this is Catholic any more than somebody who goes and promotes a video defending abortion, defending gay marriage, and calls it a powerful message. That wouldn't be Catholic. And you would have every right to question if that person is Catholic. Now, take that scenario where they promote that message. They say it's a powerful message. And then you open it up and they're promoting gay marriage and all this and that. Now, multiply that times 1,000. What happens when this group continually does this all day long? They're promoting the message of the guy who says abortion's cool, gay marriage is good, all that. At some point, you have to say, okay, this isn't just ignorance. They know what they're doing. They're deliberately promoting this stuff, and they're being disingenuous when they claim to be Catholic. Exactly. That's exactly what LifeSiteNews is doing. This isn't the first time they promoted Vigano. When he got excommunicated, they say, we stand with Vigano. And they do a whole petition asking for other people to stand with him as well. So they stand with an excommunicated schismatic. Shouldn't be a surprise because they've been promoting this schismatic for years. I think it's very clear. Nobody can consider LifeSiteNews a Catholic site anymore. Very clear. If there are any Catholics still at LifeSiteNews, God bless them, but they need to come out and explicitly say, hey, you know what? I'm completely opposed to what LifeSiteNews, my employer, is doing. And if they don't do that, you're part of it then. How can people think that you're Catholic? All those writers out there, Michael Haynes, what's his name? Is it Haynes or Hayes? I don't know. All those guys out there who are part of LifeSiteNews need to come out and actually say what their position is. You agree with this? You think this is a powerful message? A message promoting sedevacantism, tearing down the Catholic Church, establishing a false church, and you think that's a powerful message? You can't be silent, because being silent is being complicit at this point. Which brings me to my last point. I am sick and tired of other Catholics out there who have a voice, who have large platforms, and they're ignoring this stuff. Why? Why? Why are they ignoring this stuff? In fact, I'll take you through, let's see. Are we able to find some comments? I wonder if we can find comments on their video here. Yeah, we're going to go through their comment section, at least on Twitter. And let's see how many people have been deceived by this fake message by Vigano. Let's see how many souls have been led astray and are buying into this. And then I have a question. Where are those content creators out there who have large platforms and could be calling this out? MIA. You know why? Because as soon as they address this stuff, they start getting canceled. Just like I've been. I've been cut off from all of the big names. You know why? Because I stand against this stuff. Because I call it out. But a lot of those other content creators out there, they're not on board with Vigano, but they know I can't really say anything. Why? Because you won't be invited to the next big event as a speaker, or you won't be invited to this and that platform to speak on their YouTube channel, or you won't be invited to this and that. You will be canceled. I've been told by some of these large groups out there, Michael, you're just too controversial. You've been blacklisted by a lot of the Catholic apostolates out there, a lot of Catholic media. You've been blacklisted. Well, why? Did I say anything wrong? No, it's not that you're wrong. It's just that you're too controversial. Why am I controversial? Because I call out schismatics, because I call out dissent, and because I call fidelity to the Holy See, and I defend a pontificate that a lot of people think is heretical, evil, or whatever. People know as soon as you call this out, you're going to be blacklisted. That's the reality. That's the truth. And as time goes on, I'm going to continue to point that issue out, and I'm going to expose that issue more and more. So I'd appreciate it if y'all hit that subscribe button and you support Reason and Theology so that we can show those other platforms out there that there are faithful Catholics who want to stand up for a defense of the magisterium. Prove them wrong. Show them that this is actually something that is meeting a need among the faithful. And the more that happens, the more I'm going to call attention to the people who aren't addressing these issues. Our house is burning down in the Catholic Church, and people are pretending like it's not happening. Whistling past the graveyard. It's not going to happen. No, it's not right. We need to do something about this. Let's look at the comment section, though. Let's see. Okay. Praise the Lord Jesus Christ. Long live Vigano. This person says amen. This person, prayer hands. The pious prayer hands. Yes, prayer hands for a schismatic. I appreciate this guy. Not interested in listening to a modern day Don't Linger. Oh, BKdo. Shout out to BKdo. I see you there. Why are you promoting an excommunicated schismatic? Shout out to BKdo. If you're watching right now, let me hear from you in the chat. The number one enemy of the church is Pontifex, Pope Francis. History will be kind to Vigano. I appreciate some of the people who are pushing back, but you could clearly see other people who are eating this up. And I bet if you go through the comments, you'll see more and more and more people. Now, I am starting to see some people push back. Thank God. Thank God. Praise God. People are pushing back. But really, when you go through the majority of comments on these platforms like LifeSiteNews, they're mostly in support of LifeSiteNews. That's the sad truth. So where are the content creators calling this stuff out? The house is burning down. Why aren't you guys putting the fire out? Oh, because you don't want to be blacklisted. Oh, because you don't want to be unpopular. Oh, because you have a group of people who follow you. And if you name names, those people will no longer follow you. Yeah. I know how they play the game. And I'm not going to be part of that. I'm going to name names and tell people. And you got to connect the dots for people and name names. Because here's the business with not naming names. Here's the business. Most people don't connect the dots. They'll sit there and praise everything that you say, criticizing someone. But if you don't mention the name, they'll never connect the dots. They'll praise everything that you say, criticizing that person, and then they'll go and listen to that person and praise them too, because they don't connect the dots. You've got to name names. That's why Scripture and the Apostle Paul and the people in the New Testament named names. But there are a lot of people out there, they don't want to name names because, again, I'm going to alienate some of my audience. So be it then. Do what you have to do. Be a man. Stand up for the truth. Name names if you have to. And at this point, you have to. Say what you need to say to warn faithful Catholics. It's the right thing to do, even if you lose subscribers, even if you lose opportunities, even if you lose platforms. It's the right thing to do. And that needs to be the first thing in our mind. Then we can talk about platforms. Then we can talk about growing channels. The truth, however, needs to be first. More on that coming soon. Paul says, I'll be joyous if Vigano repents. Absolutely. But that won't happen if people aren't calling him out. Where are all of those bishops who have praised Vigano? Why aren't they calling Vigano to repentance? Why aren't they doing that? You know who they are. And maybe they'll say, well, I don't agree with Vigano on this particular point, but they don't call him to repentance. But they are quick to jump on Pope Francis and call him to repentance. Funny how that works, right? Paul says these bishops should be telling Pope Francis about the liberals' scandals. It is a war on two fronts. You have these progressives and radical traditionalists. Both need to be addressed in the church. However, I will say this. At this point, the progressives, most people aren't listening to them. They already know. People who are being serious about the Catholic faith, they're not listening to your progressives. You can spot them a mile away, and they can see the problem a mile away. Your radical traditionalists, though, they veil themselves in the clothes of piety. They veil themselves in a veneer of Catholic tradition, so it's harder to see. And they claim to be a solution to the progressives, when in reality, their poison is even worse in some cases, not all, but in some cases, it's worse than the progressives. So the solution they offer you is even worse in some cases. In others, it's at least equal to what some of the progressives are doing. So people are looking to the radical traditionalists as a solution to the problems they see with the progressives, and they end up falling into a problem themselves. And really, both groups in the church need to be rooted out, need to be disciplined. Looking through the chat, excommunication is necessary. Yeah, in some cases. I'm not saying that a person, needs to automatically be excommunicated the first thing they say. Obviously the church should be merciful and help people work through issues, but at some point, I think the excommunication needs to be employed, especially with clergy. Okay. Why aren't they saying anything? Exactly. I'll tell you why. Because they're sympathetic more to Vigano than they are to the Pope. That's why. That's why they're not saying anything. Because they're mostly on board with what he says. Maybe there's some points, saying that Francis is the Pope, well, I disagree. Yeah, but you don't take that approach with Pope Francis. Instead, you accuse him of heresy. Interesting. I see. You don't just say, well, I disagree with Pope Francis on that. No, you call him to repentance. But you don't do that for Vigano. Oh, boy. Okay. The word man is not synonymous with bravery. Well, of course, I agree with you. Of course, women can be brave as well. I think you understand my lingo, though. Let's not be hyper literalistic here. Vigano's done everything except crown himself Pope. Maybe it's coming. Maybe he's gonna put on a tiara at some point. I could totally see him and a few other Sedevacantist bishops assembling in a fake conclave and electing someone, conclavists. I could see it. It might happen. I don't know if they would do it, but I could totally see them going that far. They treat cardinals like princes and the Pope like trash. Thank you. Why is that? You criticize a wayward cardinal and all hell breaks loose against you, as y'all saw recently with me. All hell breaks loose and comes at you. You criticize a wayward cardinal. But you criticize the Pope and accuse him of heresy. Everybody's silent. Doesn't want to say a word. So we're quick to defend a retired cardinal who carries zero binding authority on any individual. We're quick to defend them, but not the Pope, who actually does have binding authority. It's totally fine to say the Pope is a heretic. You criticize a wayward cardinal and a wayward bishop, you will be blacklisted, like I've been. I have been. And soon I'll start to name names on who these groups are. They know who they are, though. You'll be blacklisted. But they're fine with calling the Pope a heretic. I've heard some of these guys in high up positions, we don't want to snipe anyone in the Lord's vineyard. Well, first of all, some of these people aren't in the Lord's vineyard. If they are, they're wolves in the Lord's vineyard. They're not workers in the Lord's vineyard. And number two, I hear those same people trashing Pope Francis publicly. So wait, you're willing to snipe at Pope Francis, but then when it comes to everyone else, we don't want to snipe at anyone in the Lord's vineyard. Hypocrites. You guys are hypocrites. And you know what has compromised you? Money. That's what has compromised you. money, and platforms. And they know who they are. Enjoyable, man. Thank you. Let's see. I have been enjoying your content. Radical traditionalism. It helped me a lot on Pachamama. Honestly, I can't read the word Pachamama at this point without laughing. It's glad to hear that helped. I was wondering, would you debate Destiny? Did you see what Destiny said recently? He debates most people on his Discord. You're very logical. I'll certainly consider it. I did a couple videos on him recently. I don't know what we would be debating, though. We'll see. One of the reasons why I don't do a lot of debates, I have done a few formal debates. I have them on this channel, Dr. Shabir Ali and a few others. One of the reasons why I don't do a lot of formal debates is because if you want to do it properly, you need to put months into it. And any skilled debater can tell you that. Like, watch William Lane Craig. Do you know how much debate prep he puts in? A lot. In fact, he did a whole video going over the details. There's a lot to put in there. You don't just jump into it. If you want it to be productive, that is. A lot of time needs to be invested. And I can tell you that from experience from the debates I've had. I don't have that kind of time right now. Maybe at some point I will, but right now I don't. Teaching courses, dissertation, and doing this full time, I don't have that kind of time. I just know I would not be giving it my all. I already know that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not huge on debates. I'm a little bit more into discussions because they are a little less formal, a little less time to prepare for those. But actual formal debates, and there's some pros to it over discussions. It takes a lot more time if you're going to do it right. I see some people jumping into these debates, not doing enough preparation, and honestly, they end up giving the Catholic position a bad name. It ends up doing more damage to the church than good. Flight asks, what's Pachamama? I'm so glad you asked this question because it makes me feel a little better that some people aren't even aware of this controversy. That's a good thing. That means that it's kind of dying out. Yeah. Go and watch some of my videos that I have on it. I think I did one called Bishop Strickland brings up the Pachamama accusation or something like that. It's got Bishop Strickland and Pachamama in it. Go and watch it. It's actually a combination of 2 videos. That's why it's so long. But it will tell you everything you need to know and more than you want to know about the Pachamama issue. But that comment actually gives me hope that maybe this one is dying out. Okay, so Jesse says, so Traditionis Custodes instructions was for the traditionalists to say a Novus Ordo liturgy once a month, and that's why they disobey. No, not exactly, but in some cases, the liturgy was not granted permission, and some people are saying, we're not going to listen to it, we're going to do it anyway. And therefore, they'll get Vigano priests to come out there and celebrate the liturgy for them against the Pope and against the bishop. And so that's one of the reasons why you might see some additional crackdowns on it. Kulin says, I'm so tired of Vigano's heresy and schism. You know what I'm tired of? People not calling it out. That's what I'm tired of. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I miss LifeSiteNews and Taylor Marshall from 2014, Cactoid Jim says. I hear you. I hear you. I agree. I second that. Why can't we have both masses? In theory, we can. In theory. But if people are weaponizing a liturgy, that causes some problems and makes it a little bit more complex. I go over the issue in much more detail in a few videos that I did recently. Let me see. The name of them is Pope Francis banning the Latin Mass, examining the rumors. Watch that one. Watch also Pope Francis gives green light to Latin Mass. Big news. Watch those 2 videos. Start there. There's a lot more, but start there. that might help you work through the issues. D Bear says, Mike, I love when you hang out with us in the chat. This is a fun community. Yeah, it really is fun. Yeah, and we got to do more Q&A streams. Let's see. I've noticed you have 5,000 more subscribers than the day Cardinals in called you out. Yeah, 5,000, maybe even more. Yeah, actually, you're right. About 5,500, somewhere around there. Yeah. Yep. Michael, you're doing a wonderful job to support our faith. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. Divine Mercy Apologetics. Michael, when are we going to do a collab again? We got to do something. Good to see you, by the way. I hope you're doing well. Hey, reach out to me. Let's talk. Email me at reasonandtheology@gmail.com. Good to see you. Josh V, the parish I'm looking at does both Novus Ordo and Latin Mass. Yeah. I think it's good if you can have both forms. Long term, it makes more sense to have one form of the Roman Rite, but for now, I think there's certainly a need to have both forms if it can be done in a way that's not weaponizing either liturgy. So, if neither liturgy is being weaponized, I say, yeah, go for it. And that was the intention of Summorum Pontificum with Benedict. But as we know, it just didn't pan out like that. Some people did hijack a good and holy liturgy and weaponize it. And it's part of the problem. Pope Francis is between a rock and a hard place. He can't allow the situation to continue, but if he restricts it further, that's also going to fail to meet the needs for some people who are not weaponizing that liturgy and are good and faithful Catholics, but just prefer the Missal of 62 and perhaps need some additional catechesis on why we needed a post-conciliar reform of the liturgy. Fight says both forms, it's not pastoral to take either form away from those attached to it. Yeah, all things being equal, I agree it's not pastoral, but it is more complex than that. Unfortunately, that's part of the problem. We're not talking just about some people attached to it. If we're just talking about that, yeah, I agree. And there are some people who are just kind of attached to one form over the other, and that's fine. Overall, that's not a deal breaker or anything. I do think we need some catechesis to understand why we had the liturgical reform, but be that as it may, if somebody is attached to the 62 Missal as opposed to the Missal of 69, the Novus Ordo, okay, that's fine, but we know that there's a lot of people who that's not the issue. They're weaponizing it. So the good people who are just merely attached to the Missal of 62, they're kind of caught in between the fire here, and they're unfortunately being punished in some ways, and a real pastoral need that needs to be met isn't always being met there. Not in all cases. In some cases it is, because again, Pope Francis does allow for it. The church allows for it. But in some cases it's been restricted in instances that maybe it shouldn't have been. And so good people are caught in the crossfire, and it's unfortunate and it's not fair to them. But we can't pretend that there isn't this other group hijacking the Missal of 62. And they are the most vocal group out there. And the good and faithful ones who are faithful, they're faithful to the church, but they just prefer the Missal of 62. They're MIA. You don't hear from them as content creators, for the most part. Very few exceptions. For the most part, they're not online defending the magisterium here. Have you seen any community who defends Traditionis Custodes, but also prefers the Missal of 62? There's not a lot of them out there, but you find a ton of people who defend the Missal of 62 and are saying the Pope can't do this, it's heresy, it's schismatic, we're going to disobey the Pope, blah, blah, blah. You see plenty of them online. So the ones who are attached but aren't part of this dissenting crowd, they've kind of failed to address this issue. And I've been calling for them to speak up more, because this is the time we need to hear from them. How do we even talk to people like Vigano who are so deep in their ways? Yeah, it's pretty tough. It's pretty difficult. All you can do is plant some seeds. and hope that it comes back later. Reading your book on Eastern Orthodoxy as I'm reconsidering that. Love to collab with you again. Yeah, that'd be fun. And I'm glad to hear about that as far as the book. Let's see. What else we got? SSPX prefers the 62 missile. Not prefers. They say that the Novus Ordo in and of itself is inherently destructive to souls and impious. And they will tell you, if you don't have a 62 missile mass available, you can't go to church at all. Don't go to a Novus Ordo. Stay at home and pray the rosary. That's a very evil position. It's literally telling people, don't go and receive the sacraments because you're receiving poison when you go there. That's the voice of Satan trying to keep people away from sacramental grace. Ways that people are weaponizing the TLM. Yeah, I gave a few. I've given many times, but just a couple. By saying that we are not going to listen to our local bishop or the Pope, and we're going to have this liturgy, whether you like it or not. And then they have these clandestine masses who are that are celebrated by priests who either were illicitly ordained or licitly ordained, but do not have the permission to celebrate those liturgies and are doing so over and against their local bishop, even if they say the name of the bishop, and over and against the Pope, even if they say the name of the Pope in their liturgies. That's one way for you. What do you think about that one? There's many others I can give you. What do you think about that one? You think that's weaponizing, or you think that's okay? Honest question. Another one, how are traditionis custodes, or how are traditions Catholics weaponizing the Mass? Some people are doing what I just described. Some people are holding illicit ordinations according to the 62 rite of ordination in the diocese of a bishop who has not given permission. Some people are saying that unless you go to the 62 Missal, you're not receiving as much grace as you do whenever you go to a Novus Ordo. Or they're saying don't go to the Novus Ordo. Or they're saying you have to celebrate the 62 Missal because there's something inferior with the Novus Ordo. Or they're saying you have to celebrate the Missal of 62 because there's something wrong with Vatican II. Those are just a few ways that I've given you on weaponizing. What do you think about those? Do you think that's weaponizing? Are you going to sit here and say, this isn't happening? Are you going to just pretend that isn't happening? Or are you going to concede, yes, people are weaponizing it? This is an established fact. If you've been paying attention for years now, I do videos for years now showing where people have been weaponizing. Now, maybe you're new to the discussion, and okay. So I just gave you a few examples. Do you accept those, or would you say that's not weaponizing the liturgy? Flight says, wait, was rite of ordination changed? This is crazy talk. You know that rites, including the Roman rite, have undergone changes in the last 1700 years, right? Even before the Novus Ordo. You're aware of that, right? Yes, the Second Vatican Council called for a revision of the liturgies of the church in the Roman rite. So the rite of ordination, the rite of the Mass, it called for revisions on those things. Not the first time. Kulin, wasn't it the Eighth Ecumenical Council that anathematizes what Vigano, TM, and Sedevacantist are doing? Yes. Canon 21. As well as the 7th session. So 7th session and 10th session, you want to read that. So read the section on Canon 21 in the 10th session and read the comments by the Pope through his deacon in the 7th session. And you'll see that. I do have a couple videos going over that. I'm trying to think of the name at this point. It's evading me. Can the Pope teach heresy? Can we accuse the Pope of teaching heresy? Something like that. I know I read through the Acts in one of those videos. Michael, you're teaching people to obey men rather than the church. Vigano is right and Pope Francis is wrong in almost everything he says, let's be honest. No, it's the exact opposite. Vigano is wrong in almost everything he says. What are you talking about? I've established that on this channel in numerous refutations of Vigano and numerous defenses of Pope Francis. You're welcome to engage those things and show me where I'm wrong. Bet you won't do it. But I'm teaching people to obey men rather than the church. No, the church is made up of the College of Bishops and the Pope. That's the hierarchical structure of the church when it comes to authority. The papacy and the College of Bishops. Vigano right now doesn't have a pope, so he doesn't have the papacy. He also doesn't have a College of Bishops because he thinks the majority of bishops are dubious in their ordinations. So he doesn't have a magisterium. So he doesn't have a church. His little parallel community is not the College of Bishops nor the papacy. So what are you talking about? I'm telling people to actually follow the church, not follow man, which is Vigano. It's the exact opposite. This is why I feel like commenters like you are just gaslighters. It's hard for me to believe that you're being serious. Maybe you really are this ignorant and you're being sincerely ignorant. Maybe. But it's hard to believe that you really are and you're just not gaslighting us. Vigano is the man. The church is going to be the Pope of the College of Bishops. The bishops in communion with him. He's not on their side. So no, I'm calling people to fidelity to the magisterium, the church, not to a man, Vigano. And what you're doing is Vigano-splaining for an excommunicated schismatic who is doing the work of Satan. So why are you now doing more work for the accuser of the brethren? Why are you doing that in the comment section? Have you too joined his schism? Perhaps you can tell us in the comment section. Cactoid Jim says, how is the Novus Ordo ever going to become more reverent if those who value tradition leave in droves for the 62? Maybe after the folks who love the 70s music pass away. It's part of the problem. If somebody is leaving to go to a Missal of 62 liturgy just because they find, it resonates more with them, okay, I understand that. But some people are just leaving the Novus Ordo to just kind of escape. And that is unfortunate because that then just surrenders those parishes to liturgies that could be done better. All right. So Flight says, I didn't know this. Why did Vatican II change the rite of ordination? Give me the Cliff Notes. Well, it wanted to reform all of the rites of the church. I'm talking about within the Roman Rite. All of the services of the church. Many reasons. You'll want to start with Sacrosanctum Concilium from the Second Vatican Council. It's the first document. You'll find all of the answers there. Couple reasons. There were a lot of accretions that developed over the years into these services, some that were no longer as meaningful in today's society and no longer have their intended purpose when they were originally introduced. Also, many elements that are apostolic in nature were dropped out. So communion under both kinds is apostolic and is the dominant practice of first millennium, as was communion in the hand. But the restoration of the chalice to the laity was a big issue for the Second Vatican Council because, again, this is the original intention behind the sacrament, that the laity would receive under both kinds. And this was a practice that was dropped out in the Roman Rite, not in the Eastern rites, but in the Roman Rite, to respond to the heresy of Utriquism in the 1400s. Well, we no longer are combating Utriquism, so there's no need to continue to withhold the chalice from the laity. So to restore some of those practices that had dropped out, that are no longer, there's no longer a reason to do that. To also restore more active participation. Numerous reasons. So read Sacrosanctum Concilium. Those are just a few, however. But this isn't the first time. Liturgies, if you study the history of any of the rites of the church, none of our rites are apostolic in the sense that their form actually goes back to the apostles. They're all apostolic insofar as the celebrants go back to the apostles through apostolic succession, and also the Eucharist, the substance of the sacrament itself, goes back to the apostles. That is apostolic. But the way in which it's practiced, none of us are celebrating a first century liturgy. First century liturgy looks very different and was a lot messier than our liturgies, because they're being done in the context of an agape feast, which is a meal. The meals are pretty messy, and you can imagine how that went. I have a whole video going over that in detail, what an apostolic liturgy looks like. I also have a video I did not long ago showing what a Roman Rite liturgy looked like in the 7th century. They're using leavened bread, communion under both kinds, communion in the hand, all sorts of stuff that differs from how it was by the time you get to the Tridentine liturgy. So the liturgies have changed through the centuries in many ways. And I think a good study on the history of a rite will back me up on that. Paul says Vigano isn't a man. Yeah. They just don't see it. They just, this is why I feel it's a lot, I really feel like it's gaslighting, because their criticisms of what they say is literally something that applies to them. It's so weird. David says you're doing the work of Satan. This is what I mean. Like, this is what I mean. So by defending the Church of Jesus Christ and lawful authority in areas that it is lawfully exercising its authority, is doing the work of Satan. Yeah, sure. Sure thing, bro. Okay. Looking through the chat. Professor, could you elaborate for us how the Missal of 62 is a discipline, not a dogma? Yes, I have done videos on this, but let me explain it like this. Dogma is that which is revealed by God in the deposit of faith and confirmed by the church as such. It's something that comes from the 1st century. So you can't have something that is dogmatic in nature that comes from the 2nd century, because you don't have apostles alive in the 2nd century. The deposit of faith was yielded and delivered once and for all in the 1st century with the death of the last apostle. By the end of the life of the last apostle, it was delivered in its fullness. So 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, anything that comes from there is not something that is part of the deposit of faith, like as far as new revelation, but would just be something confirming the deposit of faith. So you can't have new revelation. You can't have new elements of the deposit of faith being revealed after the death of the last apostle. So my question to you is, the Roman Rite, did it come from the apostles? Like the Apostle Paul or the Apostle Peter, they were celebrating the Roman Rite? Of course not. We know historically that's not the case. Rites came much later, several hundred years later. And they're good. They're wonderful ecclesiastical traditions. But they're not sacred tradition. They are not the deposit of faith. They're not dogmatic in nature. They communicate dogmatic truths, but the structure itself is something post-apostolic. The structure is subject to change as long as the substance of the sacrament remains the same per Trent. That's a quick answer. Let's see. Some people seem to think it's infallible just because it invokes the wrath of St. Peter. A lot of disciplines in the church invoke such things and have anathemas attached to them. And then there are disciplines that have been reversed. So I would say that, yeah, we need to have a more sophisticated understanding of anathemas, the invoking of the wrath of St. Peter and St. Paul, a better awareness of what a dogma is versus a discipline, what ecclesiastical tradition is versus sacred tradition, the history of the liturgies. We need some better catechesis here. I give all that in this channel. I have numerous videos on this stuff. I've labored for years now, addressing this stuff for years, and giving all of the receipts, pulling everything up on the screen, showing to you the primary sources. Okay. Ralph says real traditionalism means submission to the church and its legitimate authorities, not your personal preferences. I agree. Yeah. Flight says apostolic is liturgy, doctrine, and tradition all passed down, whether written or oral. That's what I learned in CCD. Now, that's not Catholicism, unless what we mean by if what you mean by liturgy there is the substance of the liturgy. Yeah, the substance of the liturgy is the sacrament, and obviously the sacrament goes back to the apostles. But the structure around it, the form, the way in which it's celebrated, most of that is post-apostolic. I mean, I can think of a couple things that are apostolic. We pray to God. All right, that's apostolic. There's the sacrament itself. Okay, that's apostolic. There's a minister who presides. Okay, that's apostolic. But aside from like bare bones like that, the flesh of the liturgy, most of the stuff aside from the skeleton is not going to be apostolic. It comes in that post-apostolic period. The only thing that's apostolic is the substance of the liturgy itself. The minister has ordination authority, apostolic succession going back to the apostles. The bishops have that, and then they lay hands on priests and give them authority to celebrate the sacrament licitly. Aside from that, it's not really going to be apostolic in nature. The form, the expression, the flesh on it, yeah, all that comes later. Now, as far as doctrine and tradition, I mean, if you mean definitive doctrine, or if you mean those things that are revealed by God, yes, that is apostolic. Everything doctrinal that is revealed by God is apostolic. You have some secondary objects that are doctrinal in nature that are post-apostolic, but they're not dogmas. They're what's called secondary objects. Tradition, well, what kind of tradition? There's 11 different kinds. We're talking sacred tradition, divine apostolic tradition, human apostolic tradition, ecclesial tradition, active tradition, passive tradition. There's numerous ways in which we can parse distinctions in this discussion on tradition. We have to be more specific in our language. Sacred tradition is apostolic. But I'll add to this, in light of what we were discussing earlier, Flight. There are some human apostolic traditions, like communion under both kinds, that the Roman Rite departed from at one point in time. And there were good reasons for it. But that's a human apostolic tradition. It's not part of the deposit of faith, but it is an apostolic tradition that is human in origin, not divine. And what the conciliar reforms tried to do is bring back some of those human apostolic traditions. Coolin says, thank you, I found it. Guess Vigano is the new Photius. The new Photius, the new Dioscorus, all that, yeah. Okay. Jesse says, I just wanted some points to make when I'm talking to rad trads of how it's being weaponized. I know I need to watch more of your videos or research. I'm on your side. Well, I appreciate that, and I understand. I hope those are some helpful examples. Much more can be said about how the liturgy has been weaponized, but those are just a few worth considering and mentioning to your friends. Rad trads need to read the first apology by Justin Martyr, where he describes the liturgy. Yeah. Pretty sure I did a show on it. Yeah. Dominique says, thank you. I just spoke with someone who thinks that the 62 Missal is somehow infallible. Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. It again reminds me of when I was Protestant, and some people told me that the King James Version of the Bible was literally what St. Paul used. I really had somebody tell me that. What do you say to that? It's like, I didn't even bother correcting them. It's like, where do I begin? How do you correct this? It's just so when I hear people, suggest that the Missal of 62 is infallible or apostolic in nature, like Schneider says, I just think it's like talking to the person who thinks the KJV version of the Bible was used by Jesus and the Apostle Paul. How do you help this person? Sean Matthew, divine versus human apostolic tradition. Yeah, so the difference is going to be divine apostolic tradition is something that comes from the apostles, but it's divine in origin, so it's part of the deposit of faith. Like God gave this to the apostles to teach. Whereas human apostolic tradition is not something that God gave the apostles to teach, but is, a tradition that an apostle practiced. Conflicting human apostolic traditions would be some apostles celebrated Easter on the 14th of Nisan, and others celebrated on the Sunday after Passover. So you had conflicting human apostolic traditions there. Some apostles celebrated at this time, others celebrated it at that time. People read the Didache that would have a better understanding of the first century church. That's true. There's a good reading from it, I think, just a few days ago in the Office of Readings in the Roman Rite. Yeah, I recommend everybody read it. It was actually written while the apostles were still alive. So it's first century in nature. So here's a good question. Hey, Michael, I'm a former Catholic, now Eastern Orthodox. My question is, if Catholicism is true, could I still be saved considering my genuine ignorance and the fact that I've converted others away? I understand. I can't comment on your particular, like your soul specifically. I'm not a soul reader, so I can't do that. What I can do is this. I can give you general principles, and you need to examine your conscience in light of them. The Second Vatican Council indicates that Lumen Gentium, paragraph 14. Anyone who knows that the Catholic Church is established by Christ and refuses to enter or remain in it cannot be saved. If that's you, then you have your answer. If that's not you, then you need to wrestle with that proposition and really wrestle through the question whether or not the Catholic Church was established by Christ. If you truly believe and sincerely in your conscience that it's not established by Christ, and you're not and you are invincibly ignorant, you're not culpably ignorant on that point, God will not hold anyone accountable for anything they're invincibly ignorant of. But the fact that you're talking to me and having this conversation might make that a little bit more difficult. Can somebody really claim to be invincibly ignorant in such a case? Well, I encourage you to wrestle through the question, because you can't bank on that. You can't bank on, well, hey, God, I'm invincibly ignorant kind of thing, because you have a duty to look into the truth and seek the truth. So you have a duty to examine that claim of the Second Vatican Council. Was it established by Christ or not? I would say your own ecumenical councils say there were. The Sixth Ecumenical Council teaches Roman indefectibility. in the session that approved Agatha's letter to the emperor. I have a whole video going over that and how that comports with Honorius in a video called One Question That an Orthodox Professor Can't Answer. Let me see, to double check on the title. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the title, but let me double check because you'll want to wrestle through that one. You also want to check out, if you get a chance, my book, Answer in Orthodoxy, that goes over this in more detail. But let me find it. I have so many books, videos on Eastern Orthodoxy that I got to look through a lot here. Okay, it's called One Argument Eastern Orthodox Can't Answer. My response to an Orthodox professor is what it says in the thumbnail. Go and watch that. I also urge you to read the words of Hadrian at the Seventh Ecumenical Council in the papacy, as well as the situation with the Formula of Hermisdas, in addition to the situation surrounding Canon 28 and Pope Leo's overturning of the canon from an ecumenical council and their response. I know I have videos covering this all in detail right here on the channel for free. I have an Answering Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodoxy playlist that covers a lot of it. Or you could type in papacy in this channel and come up with a million videos. You want to wrestle with the acts of the ecumenical councils, because the Third Ecumenical Council, Fourth Ecumenical Council, Sixth Ecumenical Council, and Seventh Ecumenical Council teach the papal claims. They teach papal supremacy and papal indefectibility. If the Roman Church is indefectible in its teaching authority, then what are you doing as an Eastern Orthodox? Why are you wasting your time in Eastern Orthodoxy? Because its entire structure is built on the proposition that Rome has departed from the faith. But if it has already accepted a council that claims Rome can never depart from the faith, again, Agatha's letter at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, then why are you wasting your time with Eastern Orthodoxy? They already have embraced, they already have a community based on something that is not true according to their own sources. You really want to wrestle through that question. I hope that helps a little bit. Again, my book, Answer in Orthodoxy, is written for people like you. If you can't afford it, reach out to me, reasonandtheology@gmail.com. I'll send you a free copy. Be happy to do that. Okay. Kayla says, you're doing an excellent job. Thank you for continuing to defend our church. You're awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. What do you make of claims about the Mass of the Ages promulgated at Trent? I find it to be a joke. The Missal of 62, the Latin Mass is no more the Mass of the Ages than the Novus Ordo. The Latin Mass is no more the Mass of the Ages than the Liturgy of Chrysostom and the Byzantine Rite, or the Chaldean liturgy, or the Syriac liturgy, or the Maronite Rite. Like, if we're going to call it the Latin Mass the Mass of the Ages, you have to say the same thing for all of the other forms of the Roman Rite and for every other rite. So I don't find it to be a meaningful expression. I find it to be propaganda. It somehow presents the Missal of 62 as if that has substantially been the liturgy that's always been celebrated in the Roman Church, and it's just not. That's just not true. Oh, good to see you, Great Wall. I was able to get all the Vatican II documents from Amazon for $20. Yeah, I mean, they're available on free for online for free. But if you wanted a printed copy, yeah, they got those. Flannery, I forget the guy who has the paperbacks. That's a pretty popular one. Czar follows up, but here's the thing. I sincerely believe that the Roman Church was established by Christ, but it fell into heresy, whereas Orthodoxy kept the faith. Does this still count as invincible ignorance? Well, I understand what you're saying. When it refers to established by Christ, it's referring in the context to an institution that's indefectible in nature, that Jesus established an institution that won't defect. That's what it's referring to. He's not referring to the Roman Church is divinely established, but it's going to fall away or something. That's not what Vatican II means. Vatican II is talking about that Jesus established this structure, the Pope and the bishops in communion with him, that will never defect. And your own ecumenical council, the Sixth Ecumenical Council, teaches that in Agathos' letter to the emperor. I've done dozens of shows showing that. The one argument Eastern Orthodox can't answer video, I go over it there. And then I address the question of Honorius as well. And I show how it weighs in favor of Catholicism, but not Eastern Orthodoxy. I think Orthodox don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. Am I not fully understanding that? Some accept it, some reject it. I do cover it in the book in more detail, though. Anne says, thank you for this excellent presentation. I appreciate that, and God bless you too. Thank you. Michael says, another great video. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, that's going to do it. We can do another Q&A stream another time. I grabbed as much as I can, but I gotta go prepare for a lecture. So, all right, y'all, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support what I'm doing here. All right, God bless. For years, I've tirelessly defended the Catholic magisterium, despite pushback from numerous people slandering this ministry, misrepresenting it, and calling for its cancellation. Our situation today is very similar to the days of St. Maximus the Confessor, who was constantly pressured to deviate from the teachings of Rome and embrace the heresies that many other bishops were promoting. He was exiled, ridiculed, slandered, but he stood fast despite this persecution, which also included the imperial court of Constantinople cutting off his arm and ripping out his tongue so that he could no longer write the truth and speak the truth. It can be costly to speak the truth and defend the papacy in an age that is so hostile towards it, just like during the days of St. Maximus. But this is what we are called to do. This is the faith and tradition of our forefathers. I plead for all Catholics to stand up for our church and defend it. And consider supporting this channel that has been vindicated by Rome's decisions time after time again. You can do that by subscribing and supporting this ministry at patreon.com/reason and theology or reasonandtheology.locals.com. There's also a PayPal and a GoFundMe link in the description of this video. God bless.